Good evening, class. This lecture is going to be on Microsoft Office Module 9. Excel is going to be working with charts. I'm going to talk about a few items in this lecture. But first let's cover our objectives. First is how to understand and plan a chart, how to create a chart, move and resize charts and chart elements, apply chart layouts and styles, and then we're also going to learn how to customize chart elements, enhance a chart, create a pie chart, and create spark lines. So the very first thing that we need to know in terms of charts is understanding and how to plan a chart. So a chart is basically like a visual aid. Now, you may remember when you were in elementary school, maybe even in middle and high school, you had to sometimes you had a book report, maybe you had to create a visual aid. Well, that's kind of what a chart is. Charts display or can represent data in a way that makes it easier to understand, that helps tell your story, so to speak. Most of the time, charts, are used to compare data, or maybe show parts of a whole relative to a set of data. So that's really what a chart is, or how it should be thought of and how it should be utilized. Now, determining what type of chart is also very important. That's probably the hardest part about working with charts, is determining what type of chart to use. So for example, you've got different types of charts, like a pie chart. A pie chart represents parts related to a whole. So for example, with my on-campus class, I use the example of someone's monthly income. Let's just say, for example, you make $2,000 a month, or you bring home that much money. That's your income. Well, a certain percentage of that is going to go to maybe rent or a mortgage. Certain percent may go to a car payment or a cell phone bill or the other utilities. A certain percentage of that may go to savings, and you may have some discretionary income, which would be like your spending money. So all of those things add up to a whole and should equal your income for that month, because you're doing something with every bit of that money, whether it's spending it, saving it, or what have you. So that would be an example of a pie chart. That's parts as it relates to a whole. Comparison charts, like column charts or bar charts, typically compare two different sets of data. Like, for example, in your tutorial or in your trainings, you probably recall seeing this set of data. For 4 stores in California that sell organic produce. So in this case, some of the charts that you have seen to this point would compare the set of data on the screen for Q1, the first quarter of the year, January, February, March, for Oakland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and San Diego. So in this case, we would probably use a column chart. We can go to recommended charts. Excel will give us a recommended chart to use. In this case, it's a clustered column, which is a good choice for this particular set of data. And you can see that the data is clustered by store for quarter 1. Series 1, 2, and 3. Well, what that is that's January, February, and March. And the reason why it says series is because I failed to highlight the headers or the labels in that set of data. So let's delete our chart, and let's go back and let's try that again. Let's insert recommended charts, custom chart title, and when I click OK, you can see now my sets of data are labeled. But in this example, the comparison is made between January, February, March for each store. Well, what if I wanted to compare each store to each other against one another for each month? I can switch the row and column data, and now I have a monthly view where each store is compared. So this is a more realistic example of how we would compare data. For January, Oakland was the worst performing store. San Francisco was next, and then third place, so to speak. Los Angeles second, and then San Diego had the highest sales. So this is an example of how we would use a clustered column chart. We can also change to a different chart type, a line chart. Those are typically data as it's represented over time. For example, again, San Diego has the highest sales, and their sales are climbing over the first quarter, beginning in January going to March. Same with Los Angeles. They started fairly well in January and have continued to increase sales over a period of time, which is the first quarter. San Francisco is a bit of an anomaly. Started well in January, dipped in February, but went back up in March. And then lastly, Oakland started lowest. They increased above San Francisco in February, but when they finished the first quarter, San Francisco's sales had surpassed theirs. So this is another example of how you can compare data. We'll go back to our column chart. We've got that selected, our clustered column chart rather. So those are just some examples of how you can select different types of charts to give you different types of comparisons. Alright, so let's flip back over to our understanding a chart. We just talked about that. So once we understand a chart, then we can talk about how to create a chart. And as you just saw me demonstrate, you can create a chart from an Excel worksheet or the worksheet data. And typically you're doing is selecting the cells containing the data you want to chart. So for example, you can see here, let me put that back normal, that the cells that I selected, that's what we charted. Okay, that's what we plotted on the chart. You notice that total I didn't select, the totals I didn't select. Typically you don't want to select the totals because you want to compare this data. Usually we don't want to select the total in a situation where we're making a comparison with other data. So you either want to chart the data itself or you just want to chart the total. And I'll get to an example where we'll just chart the total data in a minute and you'll see what I mean. Alright, let's see. So you saw me also click Recommended Charts button on the Insert tab to choose from a selection of chart types. And then any changes to worksheet data are automatically reflected in the chart. And then you can change the chart type, which you saw me do as well to illustrate, to best illustrate the data. So let's go back to that fourth bullet point. Change the worksheet data, or changes to worksheet data are automatically reflected in the chart. Okay, so let's see here. Oakland is the low performer in January. So let's see what happens if I change that to $136,987. I hit enter and you can see, look at my blue bar. It shot way up. So any changes in data in the chart will automatically be updated, or any changes in data in your data set in the worksheet will automatically be updated. You can see I changed San Francisco to 170. Now look at where they are. So automatically updates. It's a nice feature about formulas and then using charts in Excel. Alright, moving on to the next slide. Move and resizing charts and chart elements. You probably already noticed that you can move the chart. Really, you just click it somewhere on the chart. You've got the four-way directional arrow. You can see my cursor here, and you click and drag, and you can move it freely, just like you can move a picture or any other object in Excel. You can click and move it that way. To resize it, you simply select the chart, and you have resizing handles. Click and drag to the desired location. Let off the right or left mouse button, and your chart is resized. Alright, let's see. And then last, if I choose to move the chart title or any other object, I can do that by highlighting it, clicking and dragging. It's that simple. Okay. Alright, customizing chart elements. You can add, remove, or change the positioning of chart elements using the chart elements menu. You can modify formatting alignment of a chart element using the format pane. And to open that chart elements format pane, right click the chart element, then click format, and then the chart element name. Chart elements can be modified such as the chart title, axis, titles, legend, data labels, axes, grid lines, plot area, and data tables. So for example, if I wanted to, let's say, modify something with the chart, we would click chart elements. You can see I've got all those items I just mentioned, and as I hover, I might get some previews. So for example, data labels. If I wanted to add the data labels to each one of my columns on my chart, I could do that by selecting data labels. If I wanted to further format it, I could use center, I could use inside base, outside end, which probably looks the best, data callout, which is a little busy for the size of this chart, and then there's a few more options. Okay, that's one way to do it. Or I could insert a data table at the bottom right here. So all of those values that are here are now also included in my chart. In a situation where you might want to use this is where you're not planning on looking at this data. You're just going to simply show the chart. So sometimes it is hard for whoever you're presenting this data to make out those specific numbers. Okay, so you might want to include the chart data or the data table at the bottom so they know exactly what we're working with. All right, let's see what else do we have. The axes, you can format those. So axis titles, if I wanted to, let's see, more options. If I wanted to change the axis title here, over here, to sales, I could do that. I could click it and edit it just like any other text. But what if I want that title to be horizontal instead of vertical? What would I do? Well, I would click the axis title, format axis title, and I would click the size and properties icon. Vertical alignment, we want it centered middle, that's fine. Text direction, rotate all text. We want it all horizontal. So now you can see I changed my axis title. Horizontal. This one was already horizontal. And we're going to change that title to months. Alright, so that's just some ways that you can format your or customize your chart elements. So moving on to the next slide. You can also change colors in your chart, just like you might expect, to whatever colors you you feel necessary. There's a lot of other, effects and features that you can apply to your chart. So for one, let's take a look at our chart here. And one thing to remember. A chart is an object like any other object in Microsoft Office. To work with it, it needs to be selected. So anytime you want to make any changes to a chart or any other object, and when I say object, an object is usually something that you insert into a document like a photo, a table, a chart, smart art, clip art, things of that nature. You have to have that object selected to format it, to edit it. So in this case, I've got my chart selected, and you can tell that it's selected by noticing the resizing handles around the perimeter. And I now have my contextual menu at the top of the page. So I'm looking to change the format, or excuse me, actually the design of my chart. And we were talking about changing the colors. So if I click the Change Colors button, I have several different options of colors I can change. And I'm probably going to go the monochromatic. It's different shades of the same color. I probably want something that stands out a little bit more, so we're going to use the colorful palette for. And so there's my new colors. Okay. I can also change the layout if I would so desire. Honestly, I kind of like the layout that I have, so I'm not going to change that. And I can also add any chart elements, which this list should look familiar. It's basically the same list we have over here, right? Chart elements, so we can add them here or we can add them here. So those are just some of the ways that you can enhance your chart. Alright, let's see here. Creating a pie chart. So this is where we're going to use the example of the total. So in this case, I want to chart how the sales of each store relate to the whole or the total amount of sales. So I've got the store and the total amounts highlighted. I'm going to create a pie chart by selecting the Insert tab, clicking the Chart button. We're going to select a 3D pie chart. Alright, so let's see here. It doesn't like that particular chart type, so I'm going to delete my other chart temporarily. Now, let's go to our 3D chart. Alright, there's my pie chart. Now, you can see here that we're looking at total sales. The total is $1.1 million. And you can see each store, how it makes up a part of that whole. Okay. Now you can tell that this is pretty basic. I also have the option to add data labels. You can see I click the data labels checkbox. I can move the data labels around however I wish, and I can chart and change colors. There's all kind of ways to do this. Okay, all types of ways to format data. I can change the layout again with this pie chart, with this chart, just like I can any other. Okay, so that's a pie chart. That's just a different example of how the data can be used in a different way to tell a different story. In this case, we want to know, how much does each store make up of the whole amount or the total amount of sales. So that's what this pie chart is telling us. It tells us that San Diego makes up 26% of the total sales, Oakland's 25%, San Francisco 27%, and Los Angeles 22%. That's actually fairly well balanced. Now let's go back to our original numbers that we had earlier. Remember, I tweaked a couple of numbers. Let's take those back to the original number, and you can see now my pie chart updated based on the changes to the table. San Diego's now 32% and Oakland's 19%. The other two didn't change a lot, so those are the two biggest changes based on the changes to the data in the table. Okay. Alright, and then let's see, spark lines. So spark lines are a neat feature that I really like, that I think is something that probably is underutilized and not used enough. They're basically tiny charts that fit into one cell and illustrate trends in a selected group of cells. There are three types of spark lines, and you can add to a worksheet. There's the line spark line, kind of represents a small line chart. The column spark line, which again represents a tiny column chart. And then a win-loss spark line shows you, that should say two types of bars, one for gains and one for losses. Okay. Oops, try that again now. Okay, so let's take a look at some spark lines. So in this case, if I wanted to know the trend of the Oakland store over the first quarter, I could insert in the spark lines group right here on the Insert tab a line, spark line, and the first thing it's going to do is ask me the data that I want to plot or that I want to chart, and I want to chart January, February, and March. Okay, now it asks me where do I want the spark line to be placed. Well, I want it in F4. I want it in this trend cell right here. That's what we've got selected, so we click OK. Now I've got a line that has got an upward trend, kind of hard to tell where it changes from one month to the next, so I'm going to add a data marker. So that red marker shows me the transition from January to February to March. Okay, it's blue with red dots or red markers. I'm going to change it to blue with black markers just by going into the style drop-down menu and selecting a new style. Okay, now once I've plotted that trend line or that spark line, I want to do the same thing for everything else for the other three stores. So I could go one by one and do it, or I could use the fill handle at the bottom right hand corner of the cell, that little green box, click and drag all the way down. Now it applies that trend line or that spark line to every one of these data sets. Okay, so San Francisco, we can see, started okay in January, dropped in February, and went way up in March. And if I look at my numbers, that's what it tells me. Okay. Same thing with Los Angeles. It's just a steady incline. San Diego started pretty high, went up a little bit in February, then went up sharply in March. And that's kind of the trend overall when I look at the total. So that's a spark line. There were two other kinds of spark lines. In this case, we're going to go back and let's see what happens if we change them to column spark lines. Oops, let's take a look here. So we're going to change this to a column spark line and try this again. That same data range. Okay, now you can see starts off low and continues to go high, continues to trend up. If I went back and tried to put a win-loss spark line, when I select win-loss, you can see they're all wins. So that doesn't really show me a lot. So that's why you select certain spark lines for certain applications. Now if I made this a negative number, you can see now that's a loss. Okay, the downward pointing negative loss points. Like you see, it's red now that I highlighted as red. So this is where you could say instead of having positive sales, we actually lost sales for some reason. Okay, so there's a lot of different ways to represent data using charts. They're very useful. I recommend of all the applications that we talk about in this class that using Excel is probably going to be one of the most important ones that you'll use, and learning how to use charts, because I promise you'll use it. It's a great tool. It's a great skill to have, and it's one that I think you'll be able to use for a long time. So that's it for this lecture. If you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you.